Hi Joe, hi Josh, hi Ben, hi Alec. Happy New Year. Hope you're well. Sorry that this is how we're starting off this year, but hopefully, with the work that you're going to put in over the next few weeks, it should still put you in a good position moving through to the end of year 12. Hopefully, you've had a good Christmas and you've worked hard. We will be touching back on some of the stuff that we've covered so far. I'm confident that you will have done a good amount of work over the Christmas period, and that a lot of that stuff that we looked at previously, you've turned from any weaknesses that you might have had in those three sections that we've covered so far into significant areas of strength. I will be testing you on that information moving forward. But for now, it's important that we crack on and we look at some new content. And this is specifically now to do with the neuromuscular system. As the name suggests, a big part of it is to do with the muscular system. And whilst this isn't necessarily something that you can expect to come up as a series of questions in your A-level exam, it is obviously crucial that you are very, very confident and competent with your understanding of names and locations of muscles in the body. Your exam is obviously far more detailed than that. But if you don't know the basics, then you've got absolutely no chance. So the starting task for today, you need to make sure that you've got a pen. You need to make sure that you've got some paper to complete the work on and make a significant amount of notes that will help you revise this topic moving forward. As always, organisation is everything. So once you have completed your notes, make sure you file it away in a new section of your well-organised folders. So to begin with, this might seem like a very simple task, but can you draw two stick men? Fairly large, because you're going to need to add lots of labels on there. The first stick man should show the front of the muscular system of the body, so looking face on. The second stick man you're going to label with the muscles that you are aware of on the back of the body. Hopefully, both of those diagrams will be fairly accurate and pretty comprehensive in your knowledge of muscles of the body. And whilst in GCSE, a common question is, does spelling matter? And I might have said no, as long as I can recognise the word. We need to be better than that now. So spelling is important. I'll give you a few minutes to get this done, and then I'm going to list the names of the muscles that you need to make sure that you've got on your diagram. Some of them you are unlikely to have heard of at this stage, and your task will be to go away, research those names and locations of those muscles, and test yourself to make sure that you're entirely secure and confident with it. So pause the video here, give yourself a couple of minutes to write down the names of those muscles that you can remember so far, and then we'll pick it back up with the ones that you need to add on. Okay. Okay. So, oh, the screen's frozen. That's annoying. Right. Sorry about that. Thankfully, it's got working again. So what we need to now look at are making sure that we've got a good understanding of all of these. Some of them you might be familiar with. Some of them you might have seen a bit of, but they've got a slightly adapted name, and we need to be more familiar with the more advanced terminology, such as biceps brachii or pectoralis major. So I'm not going to make this easy for you and just give you the diagram to learn. I want you to actually complete the research independently, whether it's through a book, whether it's through an internet search. I want you to make sure that you are fully aware of where these muscles are, add them to your diagram, and obviously label them nice and clearly. I'll give you a few minutes to make sure that you can do that. Pause the video here, go through each and every single one of these muscles, and make sure that you've added them to your initial diagrams. Okay. Once you've done that, this is something that you're going to obviously need to return to. I'm not expecting that you magically are going to be able to remember the names of 20 odd muscles that maybe you weren't familiar with before, and the process that you need to follow is almost like a checklist. So tick off the ones that you know and are confident with. So for instance, maybe hamstrings, gastrocnemius, quadriceps, things like that. But then you need to start to systematically go through and try and test yourself repeatedly on the ones that maybe you are less familiar with, and make sure that you are clear on the pronunciation, clear on the location, and clear on the spelling for each of them. Okay, don't rush that. If it takes 10 minutes, if it takes 20 minutes, you need to just keep going back to it periodically, not just today, but over the next few days and possibly weeks, to make sure that you're confident with it. Okay, but we will move on for now. So on a new piece of paper, can you write down the title, which is muscle fibers, the learning objective, which is to learn how different muscle fibers can be used to improve sporting performance, and then the key terms that we're going to be looking at today. Some of them you may be familiar with, like aerobic and anaerobic. Some of them you might have recognized from previous lessons that we've looked at, to do with sympathetic and parasympathetic. But it's important that you're just very familiar with those sorts of terms. So make a note of them, pause the video, make sure that's a nice, clear, neat introduction to the work that you're going to do moving forward. Okay, you don't need to write this down. Okay, you don't need to write this down, but it is important as an introductory passage that you're just aware. I've tried to kind of condense this information, and I know it looks like quite a lot, but just bear with me as I read it through carefully, and I just want you to try and absorb it, and if necessary, pause the video, read it through again, and just to make sure that you've got an understanding of some of these key terms. So the nervous system, or autonomic nervous system, regulates the function of our internal organs, such as the heart, as well as our skeletal muscles. So the movement of the muscles is controlled by the brain via the nerves. The neuromuscular system is where the nervous system and the muscles work together to create movement. So neuromuscular is to do with nerves and muscles working together. Changes that occur in the neuromuscular system are detected by sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. So you'll be familiar with some of those terms. This is either related to the body needing to prepare for exercise, and things tend to need to speed up and increase in the rate of which they're working, or they need to recover, and often that's just to do with slowing down and trying to become more relaxed. The sympathetic nervous system, often known as the fight or flight response, as the body prepares for exercise, and it's the parasympathetic nervous system, often related to rest and relaxation, as the body looks to recover from exercise. So sympathetic speeds things up, parasympathetic slows things down. That's the absolute key takeout from this. Read it through a few times and just make sure that you're clear on that, and we will move on. So there are 3 different types of muscle fibers, okay? If you can just make a note of these here, you have type 1, type 2. Type 2 is split into 2 different subcategories. You've got type 2A, and sometimes people refer to it as type 2B, but we're going to call it type 2X. Okay, so slow twitch and fast twitch, and there's 2 types of fast twitch. We've got type 2A and type 2X. Clue about some of the characteristics and how they work is in the name, but you need to be able to give far more information in detail than just that. So once you've got that down, we'll look at some of the key things for each muscle fiber. So if you can make these notes, and then I will just kind of elaborate on the information that you need to be aware of for each one. So slow twitch muscle fibers, often known as type 1 muscle fibers. Other names that sometimes people refer to them as slow oxidative, or just SO muscle fibers, or slow twitch muscle fibers. Okay, some of the key characteristics or key features of these are that, as the name suggests, They're slow in their contraction speed, certainly slower than fast twitch muscle fibers. Okay? They are suited to low intensity exercise, for example, long distance running, or anything that's going to be done at a slightly lower intensity over a much longer duration. Those type of events would use predominantly this type 1 or slow twitch muscle fiber. And the crucial thing with it is that they work aerobically, so they work with oxygen to ensure that they can repeat contractions over and over again over an extended period of time. There are a lot of other characteristics that we will look at shortly, but just to give you an overview of the first one, just make sure that you're clear on that and you've got those notes written down. The second one, type 2A. Now these are often referred to as fast oxidative glycolytic muscle fibers, or FOG muscle fibers for short. Okay, the clue again in terms of some of their characteristics is in the name. So oxidative suggests there's a use of oxygen there, but what's important is that they're more resistant to fatigue than type 2X and suited to activities involving longer bursts of energy, but they are not the same as slow twitch muscle fibers, so there's not a constant and enduring supply of oxygen. The third one are type 2X muscle fibers, also known as fast glycolytic or FG muscle fibers. Now, these are the ones that are very quick to fatigue, suited to highly intense events such as the 100 meters or any events which are really, really power-based and high levels of intensity. They tend to work anaerobically, so in the absence of oxygen, where short, very, very powerful, quick bursts of energy are required. Again, that just gives you a basic overview of it. And if you can, as you can see, there's almost like a sequence or a spectrum in terms of their use. Slow twitch muscle fibers at one end, type 2A in the middle, and then type 2X on the opposite side. Okay, and as you go through that sequence, the intensity of the work, the use of oxygen, and the duration of the activities that they can be used for obviously changes. Just going to go through that again in a little bit more detail now. So what you need to do from this task is just make sure that you've got a clear understanding of which type of activity each muscle fiber would be suited to. So you can give examples of specific sports or events where those muscle fibers might be suited, but you can also give specific examples, for instance, of techniques and movements that might be applicable to each of those muscle fibers. What I'd like you to do is pause the video, make a list of at least 3 or 4 different examples for each muscle fiber, and then I will reveal some answers and you can add relevant information on. Okay, so if you just compare your answers to these and just make sure that there's a clear kind of relevance to the ones that you've got written down compared to the ones that are noted down here. So type 1, the slow twitch muscle fibers, suited to things like marathon running, cross-country skiing, Tour de France cycling, all events that are completed at a relatively low intensity, but there's a constant and continuous supply of oxygen that allows athletes to perform for an extended duration, a long period of time. They wouldn't be able to do that if the intensity was higher, but this is the muscle fiber that they would use predominantly for those types of events. Type 2A, you're looking at that mid-range of event, things like the 1500 meters running, a 200-meter swim, which is obviously 4 foot lengths of a 50-meter pool, or something like a floor routine in gymnastics, where yes, there are elements of anaerobic work and powerful actions being completed, but it's essentially like a dance routine in gymnastics where it is fairly intense, but it's not a walk in the park. And it goes on for at least a minute or two, where it's not slow paced, but it's not super, super fast paced either. At the opposite end of the spectrum, then you've got type 2X, so things like powerlifting, 100-meter sprints, or a specific technique like a smash in tennis. It may be that you can think of other examples as well. So based on that, if you need to make any corrections, purple pen your work here, then do that now. But also if you can think of any additional examples to put down on your list, it's really good to try and think outside the box and think of different sports, think across team sports, think about racket sports, think about bat and ball sports, think about athletics events. There's lots of different things that you can put down. Hopefully these examples will help just give you a basic understanding of that. Okay, next. Now this is the key part of the lesson here. There's a table that on a good day in school, I would have just been able to print this out for you, but I'm afraid you're going to have to just copy out the table on the following slide. So in a minute, once I've gone through the instructions, I want you to go straight onto that table on the next slide, copy it out, and then start to think about, and then come back to this slide and start to think about the work that you need to do here. So I'll go through the instructions first, copy the table, complete the table detailing the additional characteristics for each muscle fiber, and then using a different colored pen, classify each characteristic with a letter. So there's the column on the left-hand side of the table, which you'll see in a minute. Is it a functional characteristic, which means it's related to what that actually does? Or is it a structural characteristic, which is to do with like the makeup, or what is it? So what it does, or what's the makeup of that muscle fiber? Okay. When you come back to the having copied out the blank table, it's using this following information that I want you to try and complete the table. So for each one of these characteristics, for instance, contraction speed, the section that I've got in red here, you need to make a decision about whether each muscle fiber, in this case, for instance, is it slow or is it fast? Now, obviously, there's only two options here. On some of the characteristics, there'll be three different options, but on some of them, there's just the two. And you need to make the decision about whether you think it's one or the other. So for this one, contraction speed, are slow twitch muscle fibers, do you think they contract slowly? So for instance, 100 meters a second. Or do they contract fast? So 50 meters a second. Put one of those two things down for each of the three muscle fibers. I'm going to go through each of the other things here. Now, it's important at this stage to say, as I go through this, I'll give you a little bit of information about each one. But what I'd really like you to do as well is just pause this video and watch the video link that I've put at the top right-hand side of the screen, which is a YouTube video, not one that I've done, but one that I could recommend is massively useful in developing your understanding for what some of these things mean. Some of them you will just get, and it just makes perfect sense because they're quite obvious which one it is. But there are other things that I'm going to refer to here where you will need to refer to the video to get a really good understanding of it. The video is about 10 minutes long, but it's very much worth your while in doing that. So make sure that's something that you do as part of the lessons work. So motor neuron size, we will look at this in more detail over the next week or so in terms of what motor neurons are. But again, some of that information is detailed on the attached video. Essentially, every muscle fiber is part of something called a motor unit. The neuron is just a fancy name for nerves. So it's essentially the nerves that are attached to that motor unit, which are connected to the muscle fibers. Are they either small or are they large? So if you think about the characteristics of those muscle fibers, Is a muscle fiber that works and gives a slow contraction likely to have a small or a large motor neuron size? Have a think about it. Just go with your gut instinct if you're not 100% sure, but also once you've done that, go back to the video, maybe think about it a little bit more, and then make a final decision. I will clarify everything at the end, but just go through that process. Motor neuron conduction capacity. So essentially that to do with the nerve that's linked into this unit that's connected to the muscle fibers, the conduction capacity. So how quickly and how effectively does that contraction take place? Is it slow or fast? What kind of force is produced? So from that muscle fiber, is it a low level of force or is it a high level of force? And again, whilst you've got 3 different muscle fibers to comment on, there are 2 options here. So one of them, potentially you'll put down for 1, and then the other one you'll put down for 2 of them. Fatigability, so that's to do with how quickly they tire. And again, on this one, you've got 3 different options. So is it a low level of fatigability? Is it a medium level, or is it highly fatigable? So it gets tired very quickly. Again, make your decision, then look at the video, finalize your decision, and then we'll go through the details. Mitochondrial density. So mitochondria are what they call the powerhouse of your muscles, and they are very closely linked to how the muscles use oxygen to create energy. So if you think about which muscle fibers are going to need to use oxygen, it's either a low level of mitochondrial density, so not many mitochondria part of that motor unit and muscle fiber, a medium level, or a high level. So if it's a low level, it's not going to use oxygen very well. If it's a high level, then there's going to be lots of mitochondria and a high need for oxygen. Myoglobin content. So myoglobin is something that we looked at before. Myoglobin stores that oxygen. So it's hemoglobin in the blood that carries it and transports it there. Myoglobin is what stores it. So again, if it's linked into oxygen, which type of muscle fiber is going to need oxygen for it to work effectively? Capillary density, so blood vessels, which muscle fibers are going to need to have a high level of capillary density, which are going to have a medium, and which are going to have a low capillary density. So again, capillaries carry in oxygen and nutrients to the muscles. Which muscle fibers would have high, medium, or low capillary density? Aerobic capacity, so aerobic meaning with oxygen, low, medium, or very high. Again, you make your judgment, watch the video, finalize your decision, and then we'll have a look in a minute. Anaerobic capacity, which ones are not going to use a high level of oxygen. They'll work in the absence of oxygen. It will either be low, medium, or very high again. Okay. If necessary, pause the video here, go back to this video, watch it at least once or twice to make sure you've got a clear idea of each of these things. Some of them are fairly obvious. Probably the ones in the second part of this list, you will need to just go back on and make sure that you've got a clear understanding about. In terms of exam questions, you are only going to ever need to, you're not going to have to analyze or justify or evaluate these things. It's literally just, can you identify characteristics of each muscle fiber? And can you dictate whether, for instance, the mitochondrial density is low, medium, or high? You don't have to explain why it's like that. You just have to be able to identify it. So I don't want to dumb it down, but I don't want to make you worry that this is more complicated than it needs to be. You just need to be clear on a set of characteristics for each one. Okay, pause the video here and make sure that you've completed that task properly and you've watched the attached video. This is the table that I was talking about. So this is what you should have as a basic copy. And then this is the information to compare it to. So if you go through each one, I'm not going to go through every little bit here. With your purple pens, can you just make sure that your table, check against the information in this table and make sure not only is it reflective of this information, but that you can, you've got a clear understanding of why each thing is what it is. If necessary, go back to the video that was linked on the previous slides, watch it again, do some additional research and make sure that you're clear on the vast majority. If there's one thing that throws you and you're not entirely secure on, don't panic, but it's important that you've got a good understanding of the majority of these things, the majority of these characteristics. Okay, so pause the video here, make sure that you've got all of that and that you've got a good understanding of it. And the final thing that you were asked to do on that task was dictate whether each muscle fiber was a functional or structural feature. In the exam questions, it might ask you just for characteristics, but it might ask you for functional characteristics, or it might ask you for structural characteristics, and it's important that you can make the distinction between them. So I'm just going to go through each of these now. So the contraction speed is a functional thing. It's to do with how it works. The motor neuron size is a structural thing. It's to do with essentially how it's built. Motor neuron conduction capacity, again, is functional. It's to do with how it works. Force produced, how it works. Fatigability, how it works. Mitochondrial density is a structural feature. So it's the makeup, it's the build of it and how it's put together. Same thing for myoglobin content. Capillary density is a functional feature. Aerobic capacity is a functional feature, and anaerobic capacity is a functional feature. Can you make sure that you've got those clearly written down on your table and you understand the difference between them? Functional is to do with how it works, so in terms of what it actually does, and structural is to do with essentially how it's built, what's the makeup of that muscle fiber. Okay, now there's a lot of information there, and it's going to be something that you might struggle with initially to just recall it straight away. So this is something that hopefully will be able to help you. And while I don't want to bore you with having to write it all out again, I think this is a really useful way of just organizing that knowledge. So you've got the list of characteristics. How are you going to remember them all? So when you look at them there, are there some common features? Is there some way of organizing that information to help you be able to recall not just one or two, but a number of different characteristics? So as you'll see, a lot of them, or certainly a number of them, begin with the letter A. So if you can go back to your list and make a note of the ones that begin with A, and you should have aerobic capacity and anaerobic capacity. Do the same thing for the ones that begin with C. So pause the video, go back to the list, check which ones begin with C. Contraction speed, capillary density. Same thing for F, which ones begin with F. Fatigability, force produced. So just from remembering A, C, and F, that should hopefully jog your memory to make sure that you can remember 4, 5, 6 different characteristics. And M, quite a number of them. Motor neuron size, motor neuron conduction capacity, mitochondrial density, myoglobin content, lots of different things there. So again, obviously these are terms that might not just jump off the tip of your tongue, but by remembering A, C, F, and M, that should help you just organize them. So what I would do in terms of my revision and making sure that I've not just got notes on this, but I actually understand it, go back to your list, cover up the answers. Which ones begin with A? Can I remember them? Which ones begin with C? Can I remember them? Which ones begin with F? Which ones begin with M? And keep testing yourself on it. Okay, so the learning shouldn't stop just at the end of this PowerPoint. What you need to make sure of is that you actually understand this stuff. So when you're going back through your notes, spend a bit of extra time, not just today, but over the next few days and weeks, which ones begin with A, which characteristics begin with C, what do I understand by some of these terms, and it's really important that you understand this information. Okay, the final thing, which is a bit of it's linked to muscular system, but it's a slight jump away from just muscle fibers. It's just some basic information about this term hypertrophy. So can you just make sure that you've got these notes clearly written down? It's a minor part of the topic, but one I just want to touch base on now before we move on to the next big topic in our next lesson. So hypertrophy is based on the following information, and you need to note this down. So the fiber type is genetically determined, which means the type of muscle fibers that you've got in your body and in the different parts of your body, you can't change that. You can't change the type of muscle fibers that you've got in your arms and in your leg. It's genetically determined, it's inherited, and you can't do anything about it. But the fiber size can increase through training. So the numbers of those muscle fibers can be developed with training. Hypertrophy is when the muscle has become bigger and stronger. It's an increase in muscle mass. So obviously, if you think about the type of training that you're doing, if you're doing lots of weight training, that is likely to lead to hypertrophy, particularly if you're lifting big, heavy weights. If you're lifting lighter weights over a number of repetitions, it's more likely to be muscular endurance you're developing, but as the weight increases, it's more likely that you're going to develop hypertrophy, and that's something that we will look at in way more detail when we start to look at training methods as part of the A-level specification. Now, in terms of making sure that you understand all of this, this is a short checklist. If there's any part of this that you don't understand and can't confidently just reel off, that shows me that you would need to go back to your notes, go over it again, go to the YouTube videos on the various different playlists that I've recommended, and look for this information to make sure you've got a broader understanding of it. So the first one, can you confidently locate all the muscles listed on slide 2? Not just the basics, can you confidently say, this is what the name of this muscle is, this is where this muscle is located, these are the muscles found on the front of the body, these are the muscles found on the back of the body. You're not going to get a question which asks you loads of those things in the exam, but you're going to get much bigger, broader questions where you will need to draw on that knowledge. And without the knowledge of the basics of names and locations, you will struggle massively to get any kind of mark in those big questions. So that's something to do. Second thing, at the start of this session, we just looked at the differences between sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. Could you explain what the differences are? Don't have to go into detail, but just as a basic overview, can you explain what the differences are between those two things? If you can't, go back, review the information, look through the YouTube videos, do some independent research, make sure you're clear on what those things are. 3, can you identify the 3 different muscle fibers and provide sporting examples where each is used predominantly? Clear, not vague general examples, particularly like games-based sports. Don't just throw those in. You need to be much clearer on specific movements and techniques and actions in those sports. Otherwise, go to things like athletic events or events where you can specify distance and intensity. 4, can you provide the alternative and commonly used names for each muscle fiber? So it's not just type 1, type 2A and type 2X. Can you recall the other alternative names that are commonly used? That's important because in the exam, if they use a name for the muscle fiber that you're not familiar with, you're not going to know which one to do, even though you might know quite a lot about that muscle fiber. So very important that you can do that. Can you provide at least 5 key characteristics for each muscle fiber? Now, I've said 5, but really, what you don't want to do is learn 5 and then you get asked about one of the other ones in the exam. So I've said at least 5, but really you should be looking to cover them all and make sure that you can talk about capillary density, make sure that you can talk about aerobic and anaerobic capacity and fatigability and each of those things. So 5 is an absolute minimum, but really you need to be looking at all of them for each of the muscle fibers and being very clear about the characteristic for each one. Can you describe the different functional and structural characteristics of each muscle fiber? So again, is it to do with how it works, or is it to do with essentially how it's built? And then the last one, can you explain the meaning of the term hypertrophy? That should be your checklist. That shouldn't be, all right, I'm done now, I don't need to do this anymore. This should now be the point where you can say, yeah, I'm good with number 1, I'm good with number 2, I'm not so sure about number 3 or number 6. Those are the ones that I now need to go back on, spend additional time on, review this presentation, but also independently go through those YouTube videos that I keep recommending to make sure that you've got a good detailed set of notes and your understanding of this topic is without gaps. Soon as you start leaving gaps in any of this work, you're going to find yourself struggling massively to pick up marks in the exam. Okay, that is it for today for me, but hopefully if you've still got time left in your day, go over it, make sure you are 100% confident before we move on. You don't want gaps at the start of this topic. You'll find life very difficult moving forward if you do. Okay, I'll be in touch with the next lesson shortly. All the best, guys. Bye.